the Kenyan government should consider raising the value-added tax, VAT, 16% on petroleum products exclusively upon transitioning to a renewable and innovative energy system, aligning taxation with advancements in sustainable technology and clean energy. The proposers are UON and the opposers are Pioneer University.
If by 2030 we are not able to transition to sustainable energy or able to reduce carbon emissions by 50 or 55%, then we're looking at a climate catastrophe. Not my words, Arnold Schwenger. During the African Climate Summit, all we could talk about was how do we transition? How are we going to avoid a climate catastrophe? Well, the motion today is that the Kenyan government should consider raising the value-added tax from 16% as it is now. If you look at the Finance Act 2023, the value-added tax section 5A(b) was amended, and the value-added tax was moved from 8% to 16%. Now the question is, audience, should we move the 16% to a higher rate? The proposers are here to answer the question in the affirmative. Ladies and gentlemen, petroleum products such as gasoline, diesel, these are the major contributors of carbon emissions. Look at SDG number 17, sustainable energy. This is what we want to move to. This is by Vision 2030, these are the things that we want to align to. Ladies and gentlemen, in order to align with sustainable technology and cleaner energy, it is essential for the value-added tax to be moved from the 16% that we currently have. My arguments and what we're asking ourselves is, what is the nexus between taxation? What is the nexus between taxation and sustainable energy? Well, the question becomes clearer when I pose a question to the audience that people, companies are driven by money. So if we add money to the carbon emissions, to carbon emissions, then what is the chances that people will be people will move away from using carbon products and therefore will use things such as if I could give a study, Kenya by 2027 we are to have a nuclear power plant. This is clearly a renewable energy. Now we want people to use the nuclear power plant, move away from fossil fuels, move away from coal, move away from diesel, gasoline, and move to what we call renewable energy. Achieve sustainable energy. By this we will be able to achieve SDG number 17. Now the question is, between a climate catastrophe and a social catastrophe, which of the two should we have? We take cognizance that according to EPRA, 70% of Kenya's population uses petroleum products. Now we are not looking forward to a social catastrophe. What we are asking of our population is a transition from these petroleum products to renewable energy. We will only be able to achieve this transition if people stop using petroleum products. Now, if you look at the motion, the value-added tax will be increased once there is a transition to renewable energy. We are not increasing value-added tax when when we have not achieved a transition from renewable and innovative energy. Therefore, to make people move from these petroleum products and use the renewable products, if you look at the Nuclear Power Energy Agency, a report that its CEO gave, Mr. Justice Wabuyabu, that if Kenya manages to transition to the Nuclear Power Energy Agency by 2027, then people will need to move from these particular petroleum products. We take cognizance of the social catastrophe, but we are giving you a solution of a just transition, that this particular tax that is going to be increased on petroleum products, it will be used to now move this country to better and renewable energy. The pressurized water reactors is what we are looking forward to. Boiling water reactors, sustainable and renewable energy. America achieved it in the year 1980 when it noticed that it was producing that its rains contained sulfuric acid. Now, if America managed to reduce its carbon emissions by 20% by using a carbon tax system, then it is something that we are able to achieve. 20% is what America managed to achieve by just taxing a particular part of America. This is North America, when it noticed that it was going to face a climate catastrophe. Therefore, if America just managed to achieve 20%, imagine what would happen if we now increase the value-added tax, move people away from petroleum products, have people move to this particular renewable energy. Remember the transition opposers? The transition is happening. The gradual increase in the value-added tax is happening upon realization of the transition to sustainable energy. Thank you.
You see, the reason why I don't like starting with quotes is because I think we are in university, and therefore we should just call things as they are. Let's not try and flatter things. So you cannot tax people who do not have money. That's it, straight up. The reason why they are going to lose this debate is because most of their comparatives are with US and developed nations. Understand, this is a developing nation. The motion specifically says Kenya, and I will tell you why that is the most important framing in this debate. And anything that does not align with Kenya's interest and Kenya as a nation are out of this debate, and that is why Paul will not even be able to save their case. Two things. They say that they want people to then move to this renewable energy sources. They fail to prove the capacity of developing nations to transition, considering that these transitions are very expensive, and Paul can look it up if he wants to. Africa as a continent contributes less than USA alone as a nation. So what is the incentive for what is the specific incentive for Africa or even Kenya in and of itself to feel this specific burden to save the entire world, while itself as a nation contributes less than 0.01% of carbon emissions to the world? I think if they can prove that, they can then prove a significant incentive for Kenya to save the world. If they can't do that, then we do not feel any obligation for us to save the world. So what are we saying? We're giving you a very important context. Kenya as a developing nation. One, we have a very low economy. Two, there is high unemployment rate. And three, especially right now, there's a very great public dissatisfaction with the current regime. So raising VAT on petroleum products is only justified when there is enough money in the economy to tax, which, as we have already proven, as a developing nation, we do not have that money. As Kenya right now, we do not have that money for them to then increase our taxes. So for proposition to win, they need to justify taxing individuals who are already suffering from very high VAT in all the other products, and essentially then prove why that is the best incentive for people to transition to green energy. So what are we telling you? Raising VAT on petroleum products will only lead to a large influx in prices of a lot of other essentials. Why? Because petroleum products, as they had said, are things that are used to run these industries. These are energy sources that are used to produce in manufacturing industries, in processing industries. These are things that are used to run your vehicles. That means increase in fuel prices, means increase in transport prices. That means increase in prices of commodities because they still need to be transported to you. These are things that are included in these prices. At a point where you raise VAT on petroleum products panel, that means a very large economic burden on individuals who are already struggling. And I will prove that through two things. One, I will give you a principal justification of why this is a very bad thing in two instances. I will prove social contract and I will prove hierarchy of needs. And then two, I will argue for non-principal arguments that will go against VAT. And then my partner will come and give you our policy implementations of why our solutions are actually much better. So let's move to social contract. I have 2 minutes. By going to polls, citizens already agreed to follow certain values and norms in exchange for protection of their well-being by the state. Government therefore has an obligation to act in the best interest of the people. Raising VAT on petroleum products will further financially burden the general populace, who is already suffering. And we'll talk further about this as I argue on non-principal arguments. And therefore, by raising VAT, the harms that will come from this will prove that government in and of itself goes against social contract. It has failed to protect the well-being of the individuals by inflicting more harm on them financially, and that then goes against the entire principle, removing the justification of that act of raising VAT. Hierarchy of needs. As I have said, we are citizenry of a developing nations. And therefore, there are things that are much more important to us than transitioning to solar energy or wind energy. Simple things, panel. I need to put food on my table. I need to put shoes on the feet of my child. I need to give this child a proper education. I cannot do that if I don't have money. Why will I not have money? Because these people have increased VAT on petroleum products. What will happen? Now, a packet of flour will cost me 400 shillings. Now, a pair of shoes will cost me 1,000 shillings. These are things I cannot afford considering that they are not increasing my salary. That is the biggest problem. People will voluntarily opt into cheaper mechanisms, as we already saw when the boda people of CBD were trying to use gas to run their bodas. Apparently, it wasn't as effective because it's still as expensive, right? But that already proves that people will much more likely opt into a mechanism that is much cheaper. They are not offering a cheaper alternative, they are just taxing the already existing thing that we're already using. In our world, we're going to prove to you why we're offering you a much better, a much cheaper avenue, and our cheaper avenue is something that people will voluntarily opt into rather than them coercing choice. In our world, you will willingly opt into these mechanisms. In their world, they are coercing choice. Coercing choice is wrong by principle justifications, as I've already said, and that will be further explained by my partner.
So Japan calls out our premise on taxing people simply because like Kenyans don't have money, Kenyans are broke, whatever, that justification that he wants to bring, right? But for that to stand, it only stands, or that premise of his only stands in a case where Kenya has no alternative. Remember, and I'll make you revisit the motion, these taxes will be raised exclusively upon transitioning into a renewable energy. So there is an alternative you're giving them. You're not telling them we are taxing you for everything you have and you have no other way of generating energy. That is a definitional debate I do not want to have, and something I feel we should clarify from the get-go, right? So I'm going to break my case into three major parts. One, I'm going to tell you why this tax policy is justified, and because he mentioned the social contract, I'll engage with him on that premise, right? Then secondly, I'm going to show you why it works and why people will opt into this and why every actor involved is likely to opt into this. And thirdly, I'm just going to show you why there'll be utility in the end and like the alternative that renewable energy actually offers, which exists, by the way, will be essentially be able to cater for whatever it is you think that renewable energy caters for, right? So to the first thing on why it is justified, we tell you that every policy made is not arbitrary. There is a certain framework that is made that every policy or tax policy is consistent to, right? So you have principles of taxation in Kenya, for example. Amongst others, you have things like equity and fairness. You have simplicity, certainty, you have administrative efficiency. One that you have that is very important is flexibility, right? So flexibility means that the tax system shall be dynamic and responsive to changing circumstances in the economy, and this takes out the entire argument, right? So the biggest premise that they can make is people don't have money, and like to do that, I'll cite a case law. So in Stockbrokers and Investments Bank versus the Attorney General, essentially what you have is people complaining that rising taxes is very arbitrary because, you know, essentially people are suffering and it's like arbitrary and that kind of thing. But the court held that their National Assembly is entitled to discretion relative to what the circumstances are, right? Secondly, they held that the act was not new, having been suspended in 1985, and its reintroduction did not require public participation. This was in 2014, by the way. So the reason why this is important is because previously it was at 16%. It went to 8%, and then this Finance Act again brings it back to 16%. So there is precedence in a case that would essentially show this. So the particular tax here was the capital gains tax. There was precedence of it being there and then revoked, and then it comes back. We think it's the same situation here. And case law, which forms part of the binding law, will justify its existence. So on that point, we've already shown you why it is justified. To the second thing and why it will actually work. Now, I'm going to show you why it will be efficient. So the motion has established that there will be an alternative, right? So you are not just throwing people into deep water. So Kenya has the potential to like actualize a lot of the green energy. When Ruto went to promote this Africa climate summit that we hosted in France, he said Kenya is the leading country in Africa in a lot of the green energy actualization. You have like 92% of Kenya's renewable energy basically being green on the grid, right? So we think that this will already be a great place to start, simply because of the potential that you can see. Now imagine the comparative. Imagine if you actually make petroleum products more expensive. So you do two things. One, you disincentivize people opting into that, and that extra money you get from the very high taxation, you can channeling it into making these renewable alternatives even cheaper. So they are more sustainable. That's the thing. They beat out all of your benefits, and essentially they are cheaper. You argue that the other thing I'm going to prove is that how they are the best alternatives, because these people might essentially come and say nothing can be a substitute for like petroleum and these kinds of things, and why it would be important. So we are telling you that at the end of it, you're inevitably going to do it. Assume the world remains all good until like maybe 500 years from now, when you've depleted all of your oil resources and mines and that kind of thing. So eventually these things are depletable. But the thing with renewable energy is that it's not depletable. All you need is wind, all you need is like solar energy and these kinds of things. These are things that are going to be here for a very, very long time. So even just on the perpetuity and the sustainability of it, we already show you that this is the best way to go, especially since you're sticking to something that is guaranteed to end. Even if it's not in the near foreseeable future, even if you care about like your great grandchildren and their descendants, it will eventually come to end. So what will you opt into? We think this is a great way of establishing precedents. Yeah, with that, I rest our case. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the most important thing you get from the opposition is that, yes, we do agree that transition is really important and we all support transition. But what we believe from the opposition side is that transition cannot happen without the capacity for transition. And this is what we feel that fails to come from the government side, and this is what we are bringing from the opposition side. So what are we telling you? We are not telling you that taxation is entirely bad, but we are telling you, in as much as you are saying that you are going to tax these people, yes, good, but do you think you are giving these people the capacity to do that? And you as the government, are you in a position to do that? Look at Kenya in itself. We are saying that we are a third world country, right? So that means that we are already struggling in the aspect of economy. And for us to get to that point that we are economically stable, we must do something. So what are some of the policies that we are implementing in our world that, as you are bringing transition, we are also ensuring that these people are in a capacity to transition? Yes. For anything to work, as we have said, for there to be taxation, money has to be there, right? And it's so evident that at this moment, there is no money. The government of Kenya in itself is struggling with international debts and all that, right? So we are going for subsidies of renewable energy investments. So the government can rather introduce subsidies which will be able to help this whole aspect. How does the government do this? Government should offer direct subsidies or tax credits to business that install solar panels and wind turbines. Look at this. All these things are already expensive. So this means that they can't just push them totally. They have to ensure that they are in a position to be able to afford this. So through subsidies, that will work. Another important thing is education of the general public. We feel like most of the thing is not happening because most of the citizens are already blinded. They don't know the way forward. So how are we going to educate these people to know that green alternative is the solution rather than just focusing on the fossil energies? So the government should rather launch campaigns through various media platforms to educate the public about the benefits that come with this energy. Conduct workshops, providing information materials. Just bring the awareness to people and they'll voluntarily move there because they know the benefits that come with this. Another important thing is that we feel like the government should use more money, invest infrastructures that support renewable energy system. A good example is the smart grids to enhance reliability of clean energy and ensuring stable supply. By the end of it all, we'll see that more money will be used in this and it will bring impact and people literally want to go to that. We are also telling you another important thing that will make people voluntarily move to this system rather than just forcing them with tax. Incentives of green businesses. And we tell you that the government can offer tax breaks or reduced corporate tax rates. If a rate is reduced, if there's a break in a tax, I literally want to come to that because they know I'm going to use less money, and by the end of it all, I'm going to benefit as also the rest of the society benefit, and as also as we fight the climate change. Another important thing that we tell you is that we are putting workable implementation frameworks. Look at this. We are telling you that the government doesn't have enough money, so we need money for this system to work. And how do we provide money in our system without interfering with the current national budget? A good example I'll give you with the use of subsidies, right? When you look at the Nairobi auction, Kenya was able to sell to up to 2 million tons of carbon to countries like Saudi Arabia, which emit more to the environment. So if you're able to do this more often, we'll bring more money to the government. The money that the government can use to get these green initiatives into practicality, and many people will move into this. What else do we tell you? We tell you that the best thing is to sensitize the public. Let them know how important this thing really is. Don't just force them because, we are the government and we think taxation can work. As they have said when they started, there was at a point that the taxation was at 8%. And the fact that currently it's at 16%, it has moved. But can you literally stand and say that you have seen an impact, a change? No. So this means that in a world there will be more stagnation and more repeated signs of failure than productivity. So what do we tell you? We tell you that taxation can be there. It's really good. But before you get to that step of taxation, ensure that one, you are in a capacity to do that. One, you are also benefiting not only the government, but also the citizens, in that they'll voluntarily move to that system, not because you are forcing them, but because you have made them to get to that point of understanding how important this thing is, how essential it is, and how it benefits them and also the society at large. So we win over them because they don't give us a clear solution, a clear alternative. They're telling us people will move when they know there's an alternative. Which is the alternative? People will move when they know there is a benefit. Which is the benefit if from the word go, you have not educated us to know why this thing is important? How many people even get to that point of understanding that fossil fuels is not okay? Fossil fuel is not the solution. People have used firewood for centuries. It's been helping them. So they don't give us the solution. So we stand firm and tell you people that yes, transition is good, but give us the capacity, give us reasons why we should do that, and we'll automatically buy you a deal.
So, hi everyone. The question, first of all, this question is kind of political, in the sense that I think you guys had an easier argument. I find it difficult with the way the economy is, to sort of make a point to raise more taxes through VAT. If you even look at the kind of public participation we got from the last draft of the finance bill, which now became the Finance Act 2023, out of maybe the 300 proposals that were submitted, only one person thought it was a good idea to increase VAT of taxes, yeah? But then anyway, generally speaking, I wonder whether, I do feel like at some point the question was misunderstood. So my understanding of this question would be, so the question reads, the Kenyan government should consider raising VAT on petroleum products exclusively upon transitioning to a renewable and innovative energy system. The question here, according to me, is, at what point should we be increasing taxes? Should we be increasing the VAT after we've transitioned or before we've transitioned? The UN Debate Club, my understanding is that you guys should have been arguing that we should only increase after we've transitioned. Then Pioneer, increase, if at all, after the transition. Generally speaking, you guys did fantastic. Given the complexity and the emotive nature of this question, I think both teams did very well. For the first, well, maybe it's easier to start with Pioneer, who was making the simpler argument in this. I think you guys raised a very critical question. Number one, whether or not we actually want to transition. Many people, and I guess there are guys for both camps, people who feel like, anyway, Africans, we are not the polluters. Why are we being forced? Two is a question of capacity. The African continent is years behind innovation and technology. I mean, we've not even caught up with fossil fuels. So why are we already thinking about why are we thinking about transitioning? Then there is the whole economic impact, which I think was the crux of your argument. Like, yo guys, we don't have money to even fund the transition itself. Why transition? Good arguments. You guys did a very good job in road mapping, the first speaker. As I said, one of the tools of being convincing is road mapping. I'll make 2 points. Point number one looks something like this. Point number two looks something like this. And because of that, this is what I'm saying. Good job, guys. Speaker number one, team number one. You guys, ideally in this debate, had a more challenging argument. You did talk about, made reference to, well, first and foremost, I think making reference to case law was a nice touch. Not because I'm a lawyer, I just think it's a nice touch. I wonder whether in debate we do those things. But anyway, it was a nice touch. You made reference to the fact that there are very many alternatives that we could be thinking about. That we're talking about this like there's an assumption that we can't transition. It's even an even bigger point that you made, that Kenya has a host of renewable resources, and then that even makes the point for you on the transition. Perhaps what didn't come out more clearly to me is why then we should. So remember, you guys are supposed to be making the point that we only increase the taxes post the transition. Good points were made for transition. I didn't quite follow the argument on why raise the taxes post the transition. But I think the arguments that you guys did came out very well. All speakers were such strong speakers, and it's a good job you guys did on this point. Maybe generally speaking, I think the big questions to be asked on this question, number one, and you guys made it, do we really care about transitioning now? Shouldn't we focus on the bigger problems we have? Food on the table, jobs for our youth. Point number two, I think a bigger question that could be asked, do we even have the capacity to do it? And I'm talking about this when you think about, for example, when you look at our taxation system, little to no accommodation has been made for import duties, export duties, for things we'll be using to make these renewable things. We don't have incentives to allow for the renewable structure. In fact, at the moment, that's when we only have a working group that is more or less assisting the country in coming up with policy. So even the legal framework is not there, which also then begs the question, should we transition? But then, on the other hand, then the bigger questions would be then, should we wait? I mean, why not then make the jumps from where we are now to renewable questions, to renewable energy sources? Anyway, I think this debate could go in the way. All the same, congratulations, guys. Fantastic job. Please, a round of applause for the guys.
I'm not going to spend so much time on giving deliberations. I think Kirago has mentioned much on that. I'll just maybe give a bit of loopholes in the arguments here and there, and you'll bear with me. Being the teacher that I am, consider myself to teach. Therefore, I tend to look for loopholes in one's arguments. I'll start with Pioneer. Really good speaker. I have only one key question. When you make the argument that the country does not have enough money, justify for me that we don't have enough money. The Kenya Revenue Authority as of last year, was collecting close to 2 trillion. Doesn't that justify money for transitionary budgeting? So that for me should at least come out. If we say we don't have enough money, justify that we don't have enough money for transition. Potential for inflation, I really loved that you captured that if we're really going to increase the tax incentives, we may actually pose the risk of inflation. And that goes against the social contract, which now really gives Team Prop a strong argument to now counter what you're talking about. Just one small loophole in that chain of thought. The transitionary needs that you mentioned in terms of a social contract, that the most primary need is for me to put food on my table. Yet we're saying climate change can actually impact that ability of you to put food on your table. So Team Prop, if they were keen, should have picked on that and argued there's no hierarchy of need here that is not being catered to, because ideally this is a consistent vulnerability within the system. So, but I really love how you guys are thinking. I could tell it was really well thought out. So I'm left with 1, 2, 3 things to look at. I really like that you also talked about it being a coercive choice and not an opt-in strategy, which again goes against the tax principles of any policy that we're coming up with. Really sharp arguments. I was very impressed. When it comes to your implementation framework, the only challenge that I had, which probably we were in disagreement with Kirago, is should we tax exclusively post making the transition? You argue that we shouldn't move to tax, instead we should move to sensitization. I think that's the main bone of contention speaker number 2 is talking about. Let's sensitize first before we move to taxation. My question was, is there enough proof that we have not done enough sensitization? Because then it could be that we've sensitized people, but because we're just used to doing things like this, it's easier to drive our petroleum cars anyway. So the burden of proof is for you to show me that, look, sensitization is actually not there, we need to do it, but a really good angle of looking at it holistically. Please keep time. You know, when you do the extra 2 minutes, now I'm just waiting for you to finish. Yeah, you had a really good case study, but it's important that you are there 2 elements of time. I'm going to go to your end. Good speaker, good start. You give us the elements of the reality of climate change. I only had one key issue. When you're giving me the nexus between taxation and sustainable energy, please show me arguments for why taxation will bridge that nexus. You can't reiterate constantly that in order for us to achieve sustainable technology, we need to raise the tax. Show me the nexus. Don't just mention it. What Kirago is saying is, give me a roadmap. When you're talking, I need to think. Think like you're talking to a minister. I want to see the nexus between those 2 things. That was just the only thing that was missing. For Paul, I'm going to give you props for starting with case law. I haven't had that in a debate before. Props for that, and even how you dissected it was very critical. When it comes to Paul, now you did most of the bulk of the nexus. What I was hoping Speaker 1 is going to do is showing me the case, that there's precedent that's already showing raising VAT is actually going to solve that problem. The only loophole I had, because you also talked about the perpetuality of it, and we instead of it's important for us to actualize green energy. This is an incentive that exists, and perpetuality of it is something that's going to be achieved. Now, when you said it's cheaper, I only had one question. You have to factor in the entry-level cost to moving to sustainable energy. So when you argue that it's cheaper, show me a correlation that, yes, it's cheaper in terms of sustaining. Maybe at entry level, we could actually now involve government to solve this further. Remember, we're talking about your implementation framework. So saying it's cheaper is a very blanket statement. The only thing that didn't come out really well is that element of it's cheaper, so we should go with that area of let's raise VAT and eventually transition. Otherwise, really good debate. I'm left thinking who is taking the day here. All the best to both teams.